Madhava Kunja Vihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakaacharya Ashtottara Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 29, Text 65. Tenasya tadrusham raja lingino deha sambhavam shraddhatsvananubhutortho namanasparshtumarhati. Tenasya tadrusham rajal lingino deha sambhavam shraddhatsvananubhutortho namanasprashtumarhati. Tenasya tadrusham rajal lingino deha sambhavam shraddhatsvananubhutortho namanasprashtumarhati. Tadrasham raja lingino deha sambhavam shraddhatsvananubhutortho namanasprashtumarhati. Ladies, please. Tenasya tadrisham raja lingino deha sambhavam shraddhatsvananubhutortho namanas prashtumarhati. Tenasya tadrisham raja lingino deha sambhavam shraddhatsvananubhutortho namanas prashtumarhati. Tena, therefore, asya, of the living entity, tadrusham, like that, Rajan, O king, linginaha, who has a subtle mental covering, deha sambhavam, produced in the previous body, shraddhatsva, accept it as a fact, ananubhutaha, not perceived, arthaha, a thing, na, never, manaha, in the mind, sprashtum, to manifest, arhati, is able. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Therefore, my dear king, the living entity who has a subtle mental covering develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in the previous body. Purport. Krishna bahirmukhana bhoga vancha kare nikatastha maya tare japatiya. This is from Prema Vivarta. Actually, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna is the supreme enjoyer. When a living entity wants to imitate him, he is given a chance to satisfy his false desire to lord it over material nature. That is the beginning of his downfall. As long as he is within this material atmosphere, he has a subtle vehicle in the form of the mind, which is the stockpile of all kinds of material desires. Such desires become manifest in different bodily forms. Srila Narada Muni requests the king to accept this fact from him because Narada is an authority. The conclusion is that the mind is the storehouse of our past desires, and we have this present body due to our past desires. Similarly, whatever we desire in this present body will be expressed in a future body. Thus, the mind is the source of different kinds of bodies. If the mind is purified by Krishna consciousness, one will naturally in the future get a body that is spiritual and full of Krishna consciousness. Such a body is our original form, as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu confirms, Jivera Swarupahaya Krishnera Nityadasa. Every living entity is constitutionally an eternal servant of Krishna. If a person is engaged in devotional service of the Lord, he has to be considered a liberated soul even in this life. This is confirmed by Srila Rupa Goswami. Iha yasya harerdasye karmana manasa gira nikhilashvapi avasthashu jivan mukta sauchyate. Quote, one who engages in the transcendental service of the Lord in body, mind and words is to be considered liberated in all conditions of material existence. End quote. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, first part, second chapter, text 187. The Krishna consciousness movement is based on this principle. We must teach people to absorb themselves always in the service of the Lord because that position is their natural position. One who is always serving the Lord is to be considered already liberated. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14, text 26. Mam cha yo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate Sagunan samatityaitan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. One who always engages in the spiritual activities of unalloyed devotional service at once transcends the modes of material nature and is elevated to the spiritual platform. The devotee is therefore above the three modes of material nature and is even transcendental to the Brahmana platform. A Brahmana may be infected by the two baser modes, namely Rajoguna and Tamoguna. A pure devotee who is free from all material desires, experienced on the mental platform, and who is also free from empiric philosophical speculation or fruitive activity, is always above material conditioning and is always liberated. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahim Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpataruviyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hearing from Maharaj for the past few days on this topic has been really, really nice. Because not only is it just Sankhya, but coming the way he is explaining it is beyond practical. It's for me it was like almost like an awakening of, wow, this is the mechanics by which I'm trapped in this body. And through the agency of Narada Muni, we're getting an understanding of how a blissful soul can be entrapped in a material body. So I'd like to welcome our guests who are here this morning. Thank you for joining us. We are discussing from this book called the Bhagavatam. And we are at a juncture where a great sage, Narada, is speaking to a king. And this king is a nice man. Right? Most people like to be good men and women. If you ask people what is the goal of your life, most people quite likely will say, well, I just want to be a good human being. I want to be a good person. So here Narada Muni, the sage, is helping the king understand that leading one's life wanting to be a good person is actually a dangerous situation. Because people don't know what is good. And if they come up with an idea of what is good for themselves and they act along that idea, then they have to face serious consequences. So our good or not good is determined by advice and guidance of great sages or scripture. And even within scripture, depending upon what we are looking for from life, we might accept different elements or sections of scripture. If I want a more comfortable life in this world, then I will follow scripture or that section of scripture that tells me how I can do that. If I want to pursue knowledge, then there is a section of scripture that tells me how to pursue higher dimensional knowledge, more philosophical. For some people, philosophy is very satisfying. For some people, it's not practical enough. Tell me what I can do. How do I live such that I have all the comforts of life and still be a good man? However, there is that section of scripture that is the most essential part, and that is required for awakening a relationship with God. And our great sages like Narada Muni bring our attention to that aspect of Scripture. And that aspect of Scripture is that all that we are looking for is contained within our relationship with Krishna. And when we develop that relationship, then we awaken our spiritual nature. And unless we do that, we will be trying something else, because we have to do something. Right? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes there's not even a moment that somebody can do nothing. Even if they may sit quietly and say, "What are you doing?" "I'm doing nothing." The mental activity is going on. And so there are persons who think that they should stop mental activity also. Become desireless. Become desireless. So Buddhists are like that. Become desireless. So to become desireless is a desire. It's a material desire. And by nature, the mind cannot become desireless. So we just heard that example. A parent takes a child to the doctor. "My child has high fever." "Oh, should we get rid of the fever?" "Yes." The doctor takes an axe, chops the head of the kid away, and says, "See, no fever." "Oh, my child, but my child. You wanted the fever to go away, right?" So to release, to completely negate the mind out of any desire is like that, which is impossible. So the real position of life is to have the mind full of spiritual desires of service. So our scriptures, and Narada Muni here is making a very clear distinction and putting everything into two buckets. One bucket is called the bodily conception of life, and the other bucket is called the spiritual conception of life. And these two are mutually exclusive. Generally, we see persons trying to mix these two. And that's where, if you call it devotional service or if you call it a good life, neither happens. These two are mutually exclusive. You cannot perform pure devotional service with the bodily conception of life. And you cannot pursue material upliftment or material opulence with the spiritual conception of life. These two cannot mix. They're like oil and water. If we force them to mix, you get nothing. That means, another way we've heard this is 1 foot in this boat, 1 foot in that boat. You don't get a good ride. You fall into the water. So the bodily conception of life limits me in many, many ways. It helps me, or it forces me to see all the differences that exist between me and everything else out there. It forces me to become selfish. It forces me to become proud or egotistical. And naturally, everything else comes from that. Violence, what's that word? Oppression, power. All of this is coming because the bodily conception of life tells me I am this person and this world is for my enjoyment. Some persons might be nice enough and say, well, you can also enjoy, I will also enjoy. Let's both enjoy together. That's your side and this is my side. Let's not, we'll draw a little boundary. This is my country. I enjoy all these resources. That's yours. You enjoy your resources. This is also not okay because it's still bodily conception of life. So the first verse from Prema Vivarta says, Krishna Bahirmukha Bhoga Vancha Kare. Bahirmukha means one who has turned away from Krishna. Prabhupada explains like this, that Krishna is light, like the sun. As soon as we turn our backs to the sun, the first thing we see is our shadow. We see darkness. So Bahirmukha means those who have turned their backs to Krishna. So they see shadow. Shadow means illusory life. And to experience that illusory life, one needs a material body. And that's the part of illusion. Everything looks real. I had this question as Maharaj was speaking. In my mind there was this question. The body keeps changing. We know that from Prabhupada's teachings. I had a baby body, then a youthful body, transitioning into not so youthful anymore body. But there are certain things from my childhood that are continuing. I fell down and I had a cut in my chin. It's still there after so many years. I fell down and had a nice hole in the head here, and that is still there. There was something here. And as the body is changing, I don't have the same body, but all those marks are still there. So is the body changing or not changing? I know from Bhagavad Gita, the body is changing. But when I look at it, it doesn't seem like it's changed. The marks are still there. So that's the illusion. The illusion is the change is so subtle. Although when I look at two different points of time, I'm 40, and if I look at my body when I was a photograph when I was 2 years old, I can see like a big change in body. Yet the change on a day-to-day basis is so subtle, and the illusion makes it look continuous and everlasting. That's the illusion. Oh, it's the same body. It's the same body. And that's my sense of who I am continuing within this body. So the bodily conception of life tricks me into thinking that I am in an eternal body and everything around me will remain. And that's how life is going to be. When everything is actually changing fairly quickly. And what makes a person get this beautiful gift called the mind is such a wonderful gift. Wonderful gift. I mean, it's a 500-pound gorilla on our back. Just won't go away. It's a gift that's been forced upon us. In one sense, we've wanted it. Because I turned away from Krishna. Krishna said, all right, take a mind. Keep it with you. And this mind is what takes me from one body to another body, from one body to another body. This is the sense of continuity. That's what Narada is teaching. The sense of continuity from one body to another body is by the agency of the mind. So the body changes, but the mind does not. So karma from previous life shows up in the next body, either in this life or the next life. And this mind, Prabhupada says, is a stockpile of desires. It is desire that makes us act. Anything that we do starts with a desire. Yesterday we heard it's the thinking, feeling, willing part. It's the willing aspect that manifests action. Because I might think of something, but if I'm not feeling and willing, then I won't act. It remains in a subtle state. But if I think something, usually the feeling and willing comes up with it. And it's not that the willing is just that I should do something. The willing is also that I should not do something. That is also act. Right? To do something is an action. To decide to not do something is also an action. This is Krishna's message to Arjuna. Don't think that by not fighting, you're being inactive. You're not being passive. That's also an action. Prahlad Maharaj also says. When you decide to not do something, that is also an action. Because you made a decision. So this mind, because it's a stockpile of desires, makes us act in many, many different ways. And as we act, we need a body that facilitates that action. And the next body is designed according to the quality of our desires. So we move from one situation to another situation, guided by desire. And this desire is characterized by what we call false ego, or bodily conception of life. I am an Indian man, therefore I should think like this. These are my desires. This is how I'm seeing. This is how I see life. This is how I see certain circumstances. Some of you were not there. Gokulananda Prabhu on, was it Friday or Saturday? I forget even what day. Friday night? Saturday night. He showed certain video commercials. It was, I forget, some insurance company, I think. And it's about how something occurs, but you don't know the background of what's going on. You just come and see something. It's called circumstantial evidence, actually. You come and see something in the last moment, and it gives you a completely different picture of what the thing must be. But I remember two of the videos. I can't remember all of them, but I'll say one. So there is this man who takes his dog for a walk. He's come out, and his dog is standing. He has the leash in his hand, and he opens up a Twinkie or some ice cream sandwich. And a woman and her daughter just coming out of a car or something, they just come, and the dog suddenly tugs, just runs. So the ice cream sandwich falls behind the dog. And when the woman and her little daughter walk up and they look at this man, he looks down and picks up the brown ice cream sandwich and he puts it in his mouth. For the woman and the child there, it looks like as if he's picked up the drugs dropping and just put it in his mouth. And they're like, oh, it makes such a face. And he's thinking, why, what's wrong? Because they didn't see what happened. The ice cream sandwich fell down. They thought he was picking up the dog's something. Because they only saw one frame of thing and didn't see the background. Another one was, I think the husband comes back from work and he wants to surprise his wife. So he gets into the kitchen and he's making pasta. And he has this tomato sauce on the kitchen countertop. And the cat, I think it's her cat, he gets on the countertop and he topples the tomato sauce and it all splashes on the kitchen floor. And the husband is chopping vegetables on the side, so he has this big knife. And the cat jumps into the tomato sauce, so he picks up the cat by its neck. And he has the knife in his hand, and the wife opens the door and walks into the kitchen, and she sees him with this knife. And the cat like that. And she's like, ah! So we get all these pictures about what's going on. It's an interpretation. So like this, the mind, there were other ones, I can't remember one. Do you remember anyone? Oh. There was a woman she has her makeup on and she's going to work or something. It rains. So her mascara, gets smudged around her eyes. So she's walking on the street and she looks in the mirror and sees all her mascara. So she stands at a storefront and looks at her reflection and is trying to wipe her mascara. She stands like this. Actually, that storefront is a Chinese restaurant. And all their customers inside the restaurant are looking at her, and she's like, and I get so insulted. But that's not what she's doing, So the mind, this is what the mind does. It takes a situation and interprets that whole thing depending on who you think you are. This woman thought, oh, he's picking up the dogs, dropping and eating that. Oh, so gross. I mean, it is gross. But that's not what he was doing. Or the wife thought that his husband was ready to butcher her cat. So we see the world through such a vision. It's called bodily conception of life. And we interpret every situation according to that conception. And interestingly, my interpretation will be very different from his or from hers or from anyone else's. And that's how we either disagree or agree on some things. So our whole phenomenon of experience in this world is coming from what conception I have about myself and the desires that I'm carrying according to that conception. So some people agree, some people don't agree. So those who agree get together and bash up the people who don't agree. And then there comes in this great sage, that's the next section of persons, who are not in that same conception of life, the pure devotees here. Their conception of themselves is, I'm a servant of Krishna. Jivera Swarup hai Krishnera Nityadasa. When you see things from that perspective, the reality is completely different. Very different. You see everything in its real perspective. So there's that picture of that great sage, humble sage, by virtue of knowledge, sees Brahmane Gavihastini Shuni Chaiva Swapakecha Samadarshina. He sees all the Brahmana, the elephant, the dog eater, everyone with the vision that they are spiritual beings. He himself sees himself as a spiritual being. And then the activities that he performs, the desires that he has, are not something that gives him another material body. Here Prabhupada says he gets a spiritual body, or his spiritual nature is fully awakened. So the whole method of devotional service, or the process of devotional service, is to bring us from this discrete bucket into this discrete bucket, or this understanding of life into this understanding of life, that I am a servant of Krishna. That transition is what is sadhana bhakti. It helps us practice a different conception of being, a different conception of life. So there are rules and regulations, and there is a process by which we can extricate ourselves from this conception and place ourselves in this conception. And in between is what we say mixed devotional service, because there are these old habits and we're cultivating these new conceptions. So there is this anartha nivriti stage in between. It takes us from the conditioned life towards a pure life, or a not conditioned life. And it's important. If without anartha nivriti, we cannot become pure devotees. Or our consciousness cannot become purified. Anartha nivriti is a good thing. Most people struggle with anartha nivriti because they think it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing because we're still identifying with the anarthas. That's the problem. Yesterday, Edward was asking, when we stir the muddy pond, everything rises up. Oh, yeah. And the way Maharaj answered was very nice. Otherwise, these little, bubbles of fermentation will keep showing up, life after life, and they will impel action. I mean, I like the way he said it. They will impel an action. And when you act, it adds further fermentation into, the bed. So when it is stirred and brought up, all the bubbles are released, which means we don't act on them. I'll say this and stop. In the conditioned life, we are all accustomed to acting on the impulse. Whatever impulse comes, we act it out. I'm angry, I act it out. I'm sad, I act it out. I am frustrated, I act it out. I am happy, whatever, I act it out. It's immediate. In the not conditioned stage or the pure stage, especially when these, he said, emotions, they come up, we're meant to observe them first and evaluate them. Where is it coming from? What is my conception of myself from which this emotion is coming up? And if it is a conception that is bodily based, I don't give it much value. I just let it pass. That is the introspection stage that one should come to, or as we progress, that's how we come to. What is this? Where is this coming from? Who am I in this emotion? And if I'm not thinking as a servant of Krishna, then that emotion is material. It doesn't have substance to it, because it comes and goes, it comes and goes. So here it's reflection, just don't even consider. Boom! Shows up. And here it's... So here Prabhupada's talking about a Brahmana. A Brahmana is one who's in the mode of goodness. Right? In the mode of goodness, one of the characteristics is thoughtfulness, not reactive. So that not reactive is, where is this emotion coming from? What does it mean? Who am I? And the next stage, if that is cultivated, the next stage is transcendental stage. So that transcendental stage is whatever emotions coming up, whatever situation is coming up, how best can I serve Krishna? Well, that was the message that he was giving yesterday. Is Krishna pleased or not? If Krishna is pleased, yes. That's our ultimate marker. That yes, if Krishna is pleased, that's success. Whatever we do is successful. And Prabhupada gives us a little warning. A Brahmana can be affected by the lower base or baser qualities of Raja and Tamaguna. That will happen depending upon where we allow our conception to go. If we allow our conception to go back to the bodily identification, then we're acting on the basis of Raja and Tamas. But if we cultivate a higher consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, then we see what is pleasing to Krishna, what is necessary for Krishna's service. Like who asked the question yesterday and he answered, we're lazy. And that's why we don't do something. Right, he said, we're lazy. Lazy means we let old tendencies act on us. We just let it happen. Anyway, so those are some thoughts. Comments? Want to add something? Yeah, Jitendra Prabhu. Yeah.
Devotees might want to take a look at that. I mean, the ones that haven't seen it.
Okay. You're being invited to look at that picture there of a sage's vision of the different living entities. Yes, Himanshu.
Hare Krishna. I was appreciating the point that you were making about how the introspective person will see an emotion and try and analyze where is this emotion coming from. Is it based on the bodily concept of life or the? My personal experience is sometimes when these bodily concept of life type emotions emerge, before you can even analyze them, they just create a lot of agitation, and then you get caught up in the agitation, so you're not able to fully pull yourself back enough because you feel very attached and involved in the emotion. So could you share some advice on how to, although feeling agitated, what does one do next?
That's okay. That agitation is, I guess, quite natural because we're not free completely from the bodily conception of life. The best thing to do is to not act it out. Give it time. Because in all of this, karma and this whole thing manifests because time moves things. So better to not rush into something. Give it time. And I'm sure if you give it time, you give it proper thoughtfulness, although the emotions are going on, The whole turbulence is happening, which is fine. Consider, where is this coming from? Who am I in this whole exercise of turbulence that's going on? Who am I? Who's reacting? And how should I react? If I'm really a spirit soul, Krishna's servant, how should I see it? Then the next question is, can I act from that platform? Okay, if I cannot act from that platform, then now the issue is not out there, but the issue is here. It is me who I know that I'm a servant of Krishna, but I can't act from that platform. So I need to adjust something here, not there. So then I have work to do for myself. Yeah. Shraddha.
Prabhupada makes a short comment about
Correct.
that in the purport.
Just
It
accept
seems
as
like
fact.
Narada Muni is trying to convince him, I am an authority. So on that strength, you should also be convinced. It was seeming that on the strength of how much we're accepting the authority will determine a lot how much we will be accepting what they're telling us. And Narada Muni is trying to point that out. Accept it because have faith in that because I'm an authority. So I was wondering how strong a role that plays. Like he's trying to convince them on the strength of logic, etc., the mechanics of the material world. But it seems with that word, he's also trying to convince them on the strength that I'm an authority, and therefore you should be convinced. So how big of a role does that play?
Well, that's our whole process of acquiring knowledge. Because in this case, he's asking a